Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit.
Now, I'm really honored to bring on someone who I don't know if we met each other in the past. We've known about each other, Jon Melrod. And Jon is a longtime activist. He's now a lawyer, and he's also an author. He has a new book out, which I have read some of. It's called Fighting Times, Organizing on the Front Lines of the Class War. And Jon went to University of Wisconsin in Madison, and when he got out of there, before he went on to become a lawyer about 14 years later, he went into the shops, probably Kenosha, Racine, Milwaukee. He could tell us about it. One reason we're having him on is because he is coming to Chicago and to Milwaukee. And just so people got it, he's going to be at Pilsen Community Books on Monday, the 17th. That's 1102 West 18th Street. And then he's going to go up to Milwaukee for the 19th at a place called Boswell Book Company. So we'll run that down at the end. Let's say hello. How are you, Jon?
I'm great. And we didn't meet in the past, but I knew who you were from reading the newspaper Rising Up Angry. So it's like we knew each other.
Well, again, we are certainly comrade brothers now. Old guys writing books, working on stuff still in the movement. And I would like to just have you do that. One of the things I do in my class at DePaul is we bring in people who will talk about the women's movement or the Young Lords or the Black Panthers, but it's also their life as a progressive or a radical or an organizer. Tell us a little bit about your own experience. What turned you on? I know you talk a lot about growing up in segregated Washington, D.C., and a few things happened to you there. You saw them. You went up to school in Vermont, et cetera, et cetera. Give us a little story about yourself and how you got into the movement and what you've done over time.
And one of the things that was really valuable about writing a memoir was that it allowed me to examine myself and understand the reasons behind some of the things that I did. The reason I wrote the book was in 2004, I was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. And my young kids didn't really understand, Dad, why did you go to work in factories that are killing you now? And I decided I better quick. I was only given 6 months to a year to live. So I decided I better try and get my legacy down so they at least knew why their father did what he did. So that's why I wrote the book Fighting Times to begin with. But you're right. I grew up in D.C. and it was so much a segregated city. I call it apartheid-like. I mean, just as a kid, you'd see it all around you. At the amusement park we used to go to, the students from Howard University picketed to desegregate it, and the white racists came out and started beating up on the Howard students. And eventually they threw bleach into the pool and the whole place was shut down. And as a kid, you're like, hey, it's 110 degrees in DC. Why can't Black kids swim with us? And that began my thinking along the lines of something's amiss in this society. And then in 1964, when the police in Mississippi and the Ku Klux Klan murdered 3 civil rights workers, Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodwin, even though I was only a 14-year-old and then a 15-year-old, I said, you know, that could have been me. I better do something about it. And I went to work in the civil rights movement in DC at the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And that's how I first became an activist. And of course, the Vietnam War was going on at the same time. So we were also very active in high school, trying to shut down the induction center in Manchester, New Hampshire in 1967, when there were national protests to close the draft centers around the country. You know, then I went on to school in Madison, which was like stepping into the epicenter of the student insurgency in the country. And I was right at home and I jumped right in, you know,
hanging out on Willie Street, throwing things, doing stuff.
Just throwing things, that's all. And somebody said to me, you know, why is it, one of the reviewers said, Melrod talks in the first person till he gets to Madison and he was protesting the Vietnam War. How come he changed to the third person at that point? So, like I said, just throwing things. But in any event, you know, we were very active in opposing the war, supporting Black students striking for ethnic studies and the admission of more Black students. And it's an interesting lesson. At the height of that Black student strike, 10,000 people marched on the Capitol in Madison. Almost all of them were white. So when I hear all this talk now, whites won't support Black students, won't support ethnic studies, won't support critical race theory, I say that's bullshit. You know, if you lay the basis in education and you go out there and organize, you defeat that kind of narrow-minded thinking. And the fact that 1/3 of the student body protested marching to the Capitol is a living example of that. But, you know, during that, the huge Vietnam protest that took place when Nixon invaded Cambodia and when the students were killed at Kent State, 4 students were shot and killed by the National Guard, I also participated in the labor activities of the United Front. So I went out to all the factories and workplaces in Madison and rallied people against the war and was really excited and impressed. One of the stewards at the Oscar Mayer plant proposed that we hold a rally against the war. And a lot of that drove me to want to leave Madison to go to work in the working class, in union movement, in factories to organize, because it was apparent that without building the movement among that sector of the United States population, you weren't going to really make fundamental change in the US. So that's when I went into working in industry.
And you ended up working at a United Auto Workers organized plant in where, in Milwaukee or in Kenosha?
I initially went to work in Milwaukee and worked there for about 9 months. And then we had led some very big struggles. You know, those were the days when there were so many activists, Black and Latino, coming back from Nam. And there were, you know, young white kids who were kind of Woodstock generation. So we were really rebels. And when they tried to force us to work overtime, you know, I found the contract provision that said it was voluntary, and we spread the word. They couldn't get a workforce. Then when they added 3 cars an hour to our job every hour without taking any work off, we organized the first mass fight against speed up of the assembly line. And what was remarkable was that the old guys became active because they had been fighting this their whole lives. And they taught us how to, what we called, ride the line, which meant you didn't leave the car you were working on until you finished your whole job with the added work. And that pushed the next guy out of his job station and the next person further out of theirs. So the cars weren't getting built. They were all being pushed off into the repair holes until we beat the company. They took work off the jobs. They hired more people off the streets, and we beat the speed up. Well, at that point, the company freaked out, went to the FBI and said, hey, we got this guy Melrod, and he's causing all kinds of problems, raising hell, forming a caucus in the union. What do we do? And I've got the FBI memos up on my website. If people go to it, it's just jonathanmelrod.com. The FBI told him, get rid of him. This is going on all over the city in factories. These are people from the Revolutionary Union. And, you know, you got to discharge him. Well, a couple days after that memo was written, security guards came up with the head of labor relations, and they picked me up off my feet because I refused to leave. And they dragged me down the assembly line. People were yelling to sit down because nobody had ever been fired at that plant for fighting, you know, working conditions and speed up. But they threw me out of the plant onto the sidewalk. And I remember looking up and saying, someday I'm going to be back here and I'm going to prove to you that David can beat Goliath. And it took me 2.5 years, and it took me a real battle at a union meeting where we called for a strike vote, but the International came in, quashed it, said to people, you don't want to lose your jobs for this young radical. And the president, even though we had won the vote, ruled that we had lost it. Then I went to the National Labor Relations Board, and it took 2.5 years till I went to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in the Chicago area that ordered me back to work, and I went to work in the Kenosha AMC plant.
Did you mention the Revolutionary Union? Were you in that organization?
Yeah, I was in the Revolutionary Union, which at that time, things changed as history went on, but at that time really did some, I think, good work. And
Yeah.
we put out a buddy of yours, Bill Drew, who that's how we sort of became reintroduced.
Yeah.
He was editor of the Milwaukee Worker. And we used to sell it in front of the plants. And I used to sell some 100 copies in front of American Motors. I mean, people really read it and listened to it. And it was a good effort. It wasn't overly sectarian or overly lectury toward the workers. It really came from the struggles that were being waged in auto factories and in steel and in mining all over the country.
I miss selling papers. I really loved, I put out the Heartland Journal after I did the Rising Up Angry, and I always was involved in putting out papers. Now I'm working on books. But you did mention, we're talking United Auto Workers, and I have a very good friend who I went to college with, Carol Travis, whose father was fighting Bob Travis, who led the Flint strikes. And there is a book called Midnight in Motor City, I think, which I read about that. He was a customer at the Heartland. But I'm wondering if I could get you to talk a little bit about the United Auto Workers today. I always liked them. I gave a talk once with Dr. King and Emil Mazie from the United Auto Workers. He grew up as a kind of liberal guy like in Ruther, the Ruther brothers. But things weren't always as good as we thought or hoped. They just had an election where a guy named Sean Fain, a union staffer and formerly local UAW leader out of Kokomo, Indiana, was elected. But there's been a bunch of questioning back and forth about the votes. What's your take on the status of the UAW today and what's going on?
Yeah, I'd love to answer that. Let me just go back a slight bit in history because it's very pertinent to what's occurring today. We had the best contract in the United Auto Workers at American Motors. We had the right to strike over all grievances. We had one steward for every 35 employees, and a steward only had to be on his job or her job a half hour a day, and then they could be on union business. And we had voluntary overtime. That used to exist throughout the entire auto industry. But Victor was a close friend of mine, Victor Ruther, but his brother Walter got rid of all three of those benefits that we had won in the big three because he didn't want strikes breaking out in between contracts. So he basically built the UAW as a union that could deliver on wages. We had the best wages. We had COLA, cost of living on our hourly wage. We had the most vacation time, et cetera. But what he gave up for that was the power on the shop floor. And in American Motors, our UAW locals kept that power. In fact, in 1969, there were 13 wildcat strikes in 1 week between the Kenosha and the Milwaukee plant. And Lunenburg, the president of AMC, went to Walter Ruther and says, you got to get these crazy guys under control. Well, Ruther tried, but he never did. So to the end, we maintained a democratic rank and file run union. Let's get to the international today. In '83, we led a movement to fight for this one member, one vote, where all the members in the United Auto Workers would vote for the officers of the union. Our local pledged $100,000 nationally to wage that campaign. And we really put up a fight. We had gotten 30 locals to put resolutions endorsing the changing of the voting structure. When we got to the convention, we called a meeting the first night, 100 delegates showed up. And when it came time to fight for that motion on the floor, I led the floor fight. And, Ruther had his administration caucus, where it were all the loyal guys who he had appointed to staff jobs. And as I was talking, they were hooting, they were yelling, and we put up a hell of a fight. Doug Fraser, who was president of the union at the time, said he ruled that we lost the vote, but he went to the press and he says, I haven't had to fight like that in the entire time I've run conventions. So I feel like we laid the groundwork for the victory this year that members were able to vote for international officers. And there's been a big change. A lot of them are reformists who want to reinvigorate the union. They want to get rid of this lousy two-tier system where you can be working next to a young guy and he's making a lot less than you and he doesn't got pension rights. They're pledged to get rid of that. The problem is that we still have 300 or so reps from the old days, from the days of the administration caucus. So they're the ones that are challenging the vote. They're not making it easy for the new leadership to take over the union. So it's going to be a real battle September 15th when this contract expires in the big three to see if they can, in fact, have enough influence to really take on the auto companies and fight to restore some of those benefits that we had won years back that were given up in concession bargaining.
Jon Melrod, let me ask you, one of the things that I got from your book was the excitement, the thrill of, of the action, of the wildcat, a shutdown, a picket line, stopping people from crossing a picket line. I will tell a little story. We heard they were hiring at Sikorsky Aircraft when we were in high school. We went up there
in Connecticut.
In Connecticut.
Yeah, okay.
We went up there in a 37 Plymouth, just like the old days, when we were all in a hot rod pub then. And there was a strike going on, and I didn't know anything about it. And we crossed over, filled out our applications, and when we came back out, they hit the car with signs and yelled at us. And I remember going home and talking to my dad. And I said, what was that? So I've never crossed a picket line since.
There you go.
But let's, why don't you share with us maybe a little story about the kind of the thrill of the action, something that happened that you want to tell us about.
Yeah, to understand the thrill of the action, you've got to understand the misery of every day humping the assembly line. I mean, it is a mind-numbing, physically exhausting, just difficult experience. And you're chained to that job. It's one car a minute, all day, every day. And the boss has complete control over your life. You got to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. You got to raise your hand to go to the nurse. So you're at their mercy day to day. And that's what people have to put up with on the job. But come contract time, we'd organize people, let's walk out at midnight when the contract expires if we haven't won everything that we want. And that doesn't just happen spontaneously. We'd organize on the second shift. We'd give out to these Black Motorcycle Club guys whistles. The minute the contract expired at 12 o'clock, they'd be blowing those whistles. They'd be chanting, walk out on strike, and out would stream thousands of people. And the excitement, the feeling of freedom that you broke the chains, even if it was for that moment, was exuberant. People just felt like we have power. That's the collective feeling that you get in a strong union, in an industrial setting, when you stand up to the boss, which you can do. Anyone can do it. And that's why I hope people come hear me at Pilsen on the 17th.
It is the 17th. Yeah, Monday the 17th.
Yeah, because we're just touching on the book right now, not even getting into the most fun stories.
Well, I didn't read all of it. I read some of it, and I really am enjoying it. Why don't you, as we go out, we're going to give the places you're going to be while you're in the Midwest. But why don't you tell us your assessment of the labor movement today? And there's a lot of activity. It's not quite like United Auto Workers as much as a Starbucks, et cetera, but there is motion to organize people, and it's happening all across the country. Talk a little bit about that, Jon.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I didn't know at 72 I'd feel reinvigorated about the union movement. But because of my book, I've gotten to meet organizers who have gotten my book and then Instagrammed me or texted me at Starbucks, at Trader Joe's, where they just had a march on the boss in Oakland to present their union cards that they won an election. I'm working with some of the people at AOL. I mean, I've really gotten to meet these young militants that are revitalizing the union movement. And I'm pretty excited about what they're doing. They've got a politically broad mind. They look at it, they don't just talk about we need better pay, they talk about we need to save the planet. Right on. So they look at it as a struggle, an existential struggle for us that we need to wage on many fronts. So it's a pleasure for me to see them excited about my book. And I'm equally as excited about being able to work with them, which I do every week on a regular basis.
You're going to be at a bookstore called the Pilsen Community Books, 1102 West 18th Street, on Monday, the 17th. Is that right?
That's right, at 7 o'clock.
At 7 o'clock. And then you're going to take a day off, and maybe we'll get together. I'm going to try and come see on that Monday. But on Wednesday, the 19th, you're going up to our sister city, so to speak, where they once had a socialist mayor, up in Milwaukee at Boswell Book Company. And that's also at 7 o'clock.
No, that one's actually at 6:30.
6:30, okay. And the book, once again, is Fighting Times, and it's put out by PM Press, which is an anarchist press, as I recall.
That's right.
And you got anything else you want to share? We got about a minute left. Go give us a little enthusiastic rap, a little bit of whatever you want to share.
Well, right now, there's the greatest support for trade union, for the union movement that there's been in 50 years. I think it's at 71%, which really gives us the opportunity to get in there and organize the unorganized. I'm working with a couple of guys who I met down south in the Southeast. That's become industrial America. People should not forget there's two industrial powers in the world today, China and the US. And so we are still an industrial country. And these young people some of them have gone down south to organize. And there's auto plants, there's EV plants, there's EV parts plants, there's truck plants. I got a guy I'm working with who works in a UAW shop where they make electric buses. This is a time for young people who want to be socialists in the trade union movement to take a look at going in, taking those jobs if they really want to change the world and see what it's like to work there. You'll learn every day. You'll learn from the camaraderie of people on the assembly line, and you've got a chance to make a real difference in the world going forward.
Well, you're a hell of a guy, Jon Melrod, and I'm looking forward to actually meeting you in person. Not just knowing about you. So we're going to see you on Monday, the 17th at Pilsen Community Books. I hope I can bring my buddy Bob Lawson, who did work for the UAW for a while as an organizer. He comes out of Rising Up Angry. I'll try to pump up some pictures, and I want to thank you for hitting me up, telling me about your book, coming on the show. And I'm going to come back to you over and over as one of our key labor reporters on Live from the Heartland.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you giving me the time.